Why is being quiet or shy seen as rude in the USA, but polite in Japan? You might have experienced this if you are an introvert who moved to the US for college or work. One day, your boss might say something like, "Hey, why don't you speak up more in meetings?" Or "You need to be more vocal about your opinions." Your American friends might also tell you that you are too quiet and ask, "Why don't you talk more?" However, these phrases may sound impolite and even offensive, but it's not necessarily the case. Americans can be very direct, and sometimes their straightforwardness can come off as rude to people from other cultures. Before we dive into this topic, let me ask you a question. What do you think? Why are Americans so direct? Leave your answer in the comments below and then watch the rest of the video to see if your ideas match mine. Today, I want to explain why Americans may see someone who is quiet and shy as rude and how this can be perceived differently in other countries. The quiet one is polite. In many countries, especially in Asia, speaking less is considered polite and respectful. This is because speaking less shows that you are listening and paying attention to the other person. For example, in Japan, people are taught from a young age to speak in a polite and indirect way. This is called omotenashi in Japanese. This means that instead of saying things directly, it is better to hint at what you mean or beat around the bush. It is also important to consider the feelings of others when speaking and to avoid saying anything that could be offensive or hurtful. A Japanese person may feel that it is rude to interrupt or to speak too loudly. Therefore, they may prefer to stay quiet rather than speak. It is important to note that this is a generalization, and there are always exceptions. Not all Japanese people are the same, and some may be quite outspoken and direct. However, this is generally true that Japanese culture values politeness and respect. I remember living in Japan and attending a business meeting with my boss. My boss was very quiet during the meeting and hardly said anything. I thought that he was not interested in the project, but later I found out that he was actually very passionate about it. He just didn't feel the need to talk much during the meeting. He had confidence in his team and trusted them to do a good job. On the other hand, I am an American and I am used to being more talkative and expressive. I often find myself wanting to speak up more in meetings, even if I don't have anything important to say. I know that this can be seen as rude or annoying by my Japanese colleagues. So I try to be more aware of my behavior and tone down my talkativeness. In contrast, in the United States, being more talkative and outgoing is valued. When someone is quiet, it can be seen as being disinterested or unengaged. For example, in the USA, children who are quiet and shy may be seen as introverted or even antisocial. Teachers and parents may worry that the child is having trouble connecting with others or is not enjoying school. That is why in American schools, there is often an emphasis on participation and speaking up in class. Students are often encouraged to share their thoughts and opinions, even if they are not fully formed yet. Of course, there are also many talkative kids in Japan. But in general, Japanese classrooms are quieter, and students are expected to be more obedient and less disruptive. However, being too loud and overbearing can also be seen as rude, so it's important to find a balance. I once had a boss who was extremely loud and overbearing. I found it difficult to work for him because he would often yell at his employees and make them feel humiliated. I remember coming home from work feeling stressed and anxious. Eventually, I decided to quit my job because I felt that it was not a healthy work environment. His behavior is definitely not acceptable, but I understand that he might have been trying to motivate his team to work harder. But there are better ways to do it without being so aggressive and disrespectful. For example, in some cases, being quiet and reserved can be seen as an advantage. For example, in situations that require a lot of focus and concentration, such as surgery or playing an instrument, it can be beneficial to be in the zone and not get distracted by outside noise or chatter. That is why many surgeons and musicians train themselves to be able to focus deeply and block out distractions. Being quiet and reserved can also be seen as a strength in situations that require a lot of creativity and imagination, such as writing or painting. Many artists find that they work best in silence and solitude, and they use this time to reflect on their thoughts and emotions and to come up with new ideas. When I moved to the US, I thought it was strange that people talked so much. Even when I went to parties, people would talk about their jobs, their relationships, their families, their weekend plans. And I thought that it was rude to interrupt or to change the subject. However, I soon realized that it was just the way things were done here. People were just being friendly and trying to get to know each other better. I started to talk more and I found that it was a lot of fun. I made new friends and I learned a lot about American culture. However, I still prefer to be more quiet and reserved in social situations. And I think that it is perfectly polite. Overall, Americans value being more talkative and outgoing. When someone is quiet, it can be seen as being disinterested or unengaged. But it is important to note that there are also many talkative kids in Japan. However, in general, Japanese classrooms are quieter and students are expected to be more obedient and less disruptive. So why do you think Americans are so direct? If you are a non-native English speaker, you might have noticed that native speakers tend to be very direct in their communication style. They don't beat around the bush, and they say what they mean. This can be a bit jarring for people from other cultures who are used to being more polite and indirect in their communication. Native speakers often use slang and idioms that can be difficult for learners to understand. Slang is informal language that is often specific to a particular group or region. For example, the word chill can mean relaxed or cool. Idioms are phrases that have a figurative meaning that is different from the literal meaning of the words. For example, it's raining cats and dogs means it's raining heavily. These informal expressions can make it difficult for non-native speakers to understand what native speakers mean. Now, let's move on to the next point. Native speakers often speak very quickly. They don't have time to think about every word they say. They just say whatever comes to mind. This can be a challenge for non-native speakers who are trying to learn the language because it can be difficult to understand what is being said. If you are a non-native speaker, you might have noticed that native speakers often interrupt each other. They don't wait their turn to speak. They just jump in when they have something to say. This can be frustrating for learners who are used to taking turns in conversations. Another thing that can make communication difficult between native and non-native speakers is the use of humor. Native speakers often use humor to make people laugh or to break the ice in social situations. They may tell jokes or make funny faces or use sarcasm. However, humor is often based on cultural norms and can be difficult for learners to understand. What one person finds funny, another person may not. This can lead to misunderstandings and awkward conversations. Finally, native speakers often use nonverbal cues to communicate. They use body language and facial expressions to convey meaning. For example, they may roll their eyes to show that they are bored, or they may smile to show that they are happy. These nonverbal cues can be difficult for learners to interpret correctly, which can lead to misunderstandings. Despite these challenges, it is possible for non-native speakers to communicate effectively with native speakers. With practice and patience, learners can develop the skills they need to understand and be understood. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.